born in Warren County, Kentucky, 1924. You were hesitant to ask that, weren't you? I hardly remember that. I wasn't affected by World War One. I had two uncles who were in it, but I was too young to remember. I wasn't even born. Not much. I was an only child and very fortunate. We were never hungry. But I do remember not having enough money to buy a new pair of shoes, so my parents had them half soled, and the nails came through and hurt my feet. And then when I complained about that, they scraped together enough money, $5, to buy me a new pair of shoes, and sent me from Russellville, Kentucky, to Bowling Green, Kentucky, to one of my aunts who was very saving with her money. And she spent this $5 on a new pair of shoes, but she wanted them to last a long time, and they were way too big for me, and I could never wear them. And to this day, every time I see a pair of shoes that fit me, I buy them, whether I need them or not. My father, now you know it's not my father that was in this. Okay. Well, as I said, I was his only child. He really wanted a boy, but he accepted a girl, but he tried to make a boy out of it. I was driving an automobile when I was 12 years old, and my father was in the automobile business. And way before I was 16, I would ride with him to Evansville or to Cincinnati to bring back new cars. And sometimes he drove and I drove part of the way. But a few times he drove one and I drove one. But there was no traffic. There was no problem. What? She was a housewife. She worked harder than anybody. Mother always had a saying for everything that she wanted me to remember, and to this day, every time I go to do anything, you're going to do it right, do it. If you're going to do it at all, do it right. And the little train that didn't think he could, yes I can, try again. And a lot of those things still go through my mind. And I quoted them to my children, too, I think. They tell me I did. The biggest difference is back then we were so grateful for everything we had. And now children just seem to think it's a way of life. You have to have it. You can't just get by. You have to have what everybody else has. When I was 8 or 9 years old, we lived in a little town, and they had a fireman's convention there. And they wanted someone to jump out of a third-story hotel window into a net. And I got to do that. And that same night, barn, just a block away from the fire station, caught on fire and burned up because there were so many fire trucks from out of town they couldn't get to it. They got in each other's way. And that was one thing that I thought was kind of funny. And I well remember the day that I heard that Pearl Harbor had been burned and bombed, and I know where I was that day. Everybody gathered downtown on the corner at a drugstore, and I was on my way to the drugstore when my present husband stopped and told me that this had happened. I hadn't heard it. I was overwhelmed because I hadn't been paying too much attention to the war news. We didn't have television, and my parents listened to the radio, but I didn't much. And so I had to go to school and absorb all this, and I was a junior in high school that year. No. I said that the man who told me is now my husband. But I married somebody else before he and I married. And when I graduated from high school the next year, in May, I was 17 years old. Immediately went to Fort Campbell. It's Camp Campbell then. Wasn't even finished. And got a job as working in rail transportation. And one of my friends that I had grown up with, we were doing our bit for the war effort, went with me, and my father took us both over there for our interviews and get our job. And we both were hired because they must have been desperate to be hiring all these young girls. Then we were sent to Fort Knox for training for our jobs. She didn't work in the same office I did. I've forgotten what her office was. But anyway, then we went to Clarksville, Tennessee, after 2 weeks training at Fort Knox, and started work. The streets had not been paved into Camp Campbell, and when it rained, we'd have to take our boots with us, get out at the gate, and walk in with our boots on, and then carry our shoes so we could work all day. And that's the way I met my first husband. I was in charge of shipping. Excuse me a minute. Shipping officers' effects. And he came in to see if his had arrived from Fort Knox. And somehow or another, we must have had a good conversation because he kept coming back. And I think that was about in July. 42. And might have been as late as August. But anyway, by the time because I was so young, I found everybody protecting me. My first landlady interviewed everybody I went out with and had to approve him before I could go with him. And then Ken, he was First Lieutenant Kenneth L. Green, 43rd Tank Battalion. And I cannot remember. He's company commander. I can't remember the company right now. And when he and I started going together after he kept coming in for his things, evidently this landlady approved of him. And also, we had a captain who was the officer at rail transportation, and then there was a civilian man, and 2 enlisted men working there, plus some women. I was the youngest one there. But anyway, all that group of men had to approve of Ken before I could go out with him. And so, but we finally did start dating, and I had my 18th birthday soon after we started dating. He gave me this locket for my 18th birthday, so it's an antique now. And I did date some other people, but it was mostly he. And I met him in 42, married him in 43, had his baby in 44, and he was killed in 45. Well, what did I do about what? I was in charge of receiving and shipping officers' personal effects. My father was very proud because I made all of $120 a month, and he thought that was wonderful. And it was back in that time for somebody just out of high school. And I guess mother, is all mothers, kind of worried. And I can certainly see why she should. That her only child had never been away from home. But I always lived with a bunch of girls. The first place I lived, we just had a room, but there were 4 girls in that room. Then 7 of us got together and rented an apartment. And can you imagine 7 girls, young girls at that age, all having to be at work at 7 o'clock in the morning, 1 bathroom, 2 bedrooms, and, well, we had some rooms so that we could, one room was a great big room, but just 1 bathroom, and most of us rode with the same man. In the beginning, we had to go by bus, but we found somebody that worked from Clarksville who worked on the base and had an old car. He'd pick us up and take us out there, and we paid him so much a month to ride with him. And all had to be there by 7 o'clock in the morning, but we made it. Probably because it was the only thing available, and they were calling for people. They needed help. I don't know how I heard about it in the beginning, but during the summer, some of my teachers worked down there part-time. And I rode back and forth from my hometown with them. Kenneth L. Green. I really don't remember anything about the first date except that landlady interviewing him. So, well, I was standing there waiting for her to see whether she was going to approve and I could go out with him or not. She asked him where he was from and about his family and so forth. I think she was trying to see if he was married. Of course, a lot of them did try to date the women working down there who were married. But I was very fortunate. I never had that experience. But some of the girls I ran around with did, and they didn't know it for a long time. Quiet, well educated. He was. He graduated. He got his law degree and his call to active service the same day. And he was just out of law school and older than I, an older man. And his family just was horrified that he was bringing home this child bride. And they thought he was too young to get married. And he was 6 years older than I. We had everything was going so fast. It's hard to remember all that went on in sequence because you were making new friends, and then after they went overseas, you began to hear about all these deaths and so forth. And my son now keeps questioning me about, did I know this and that one and another. The names seem familiar, but there was just so much going on, I can't remember it all. Oh, that was another something. Oh, first Ken came to my mother and father and asked, and they sat up half the night. They went to bed early normally, trying to talk us out of it because I was too young. But they finally consented this was all right. And then we made a trip up. I had never met anybody but his mother. We made a trip to Illinois so I could meet the rest of his family. His mother had been to visit him, and I'd met her. But his father was very ill at that time, and none of the rest of the family could come. So I went up Thanksgiving and met them, and then we married December the 22nd. And by then, he had been sent to Camp Barclay and was to come back for the wedding. We had a church wedding planned, and invitations had been sent. Had the rehearsal dinner the night before, and I was going on my way to the beauty shop to have my hair done, when somebody came and said, my groom was in the hospital. They thought he had an attack of appendicitis. But they were going to freeze his side, and I could come out to the base and be married in the hospital, which I did. And we had to leave somebody at the church to tell all these people, no wedding here. And I went out, was married, came home, spent my night with all the girls. He got out of the hospital in a couple of days, and then we got on the train and went to Illinois to his family. We had planned to go to Mexico on our honeymoon. But his father got much sicker, and none of his family came to the wedding because of this. So we went and spent Christmas with his family, and then took the train from there to Abilene and lived right across the street from Abilene Christian College with a professor from the college and his wife. And then we came back he was sent back to Fort Knox just for training of some kind. And I think he took this just so he knew that I'd like to get back and see my family because I'd never been away from home, or they'd like to see me. I wasn't homesick. But we came back for a month or two. And I think that was when his father died, and we were there. And so we were in Illinois for the funeral, and then came back to Abilene. When we came back, we moved over closer to the hospital. By this time, I knew I was pregnant. And after going to the doctor, I knew that then, or I went to the doctor. Suspected I was, and went to the doctor later. But anyway, my doctor thought maybe I was going to have twins. And he told me if I had any dreaming idea that I wanted to go home, I had to do it in July. Well, I wasn't about to leave because they hadn't even talked about going overseas. And I elected to stay, and lo and behold, they pulled out 3 weeks before this baby was born. And after the whole outfit left, all I knew was my landlady and my doctor in that town. And baby wasn't born, as I said, for 3 weeks, but I knew my mother was coming. And she had such a hard time getting there on the train because she hadn't made reservations early because she had to wait for me to call. And it took her at least a week to get there. And I had no idea when she would be there. And I met every train that came in from that direction. 2 o'clock in the morning and everything. But Mother finally got there, and she was with me when the baby was born. And his father, we got a telegram off to him, and he did know he had a son, and we exchanged letters. after that, and then he was killed January the 17th of 1945. One of the things that fascinated me about it was you'd be driving. You'd be driving down the street, and part of it was paved, and then you'd hit a section that wasn't. And I questioned why this was. Well, the people that didn't have any. The people who didn't have any paving hadn't paid a tax to pave it. And I thought that was odd. Never heard of that before. Very friendly. I love my landlady. And I didn't know the people next door too well. But when I got up early in the morning to go to the hospital, the woman hollered out the window, "Just a minute, my husband's coming. He'll take you to the hospital as soon as he gets his pains on." And he did. They came and took Mother and me to the hospital, which was a good thing because Mother couldn't drive. Something Memorial. Hardin Memorial. Okay, now my son and I had an argument about that this morning. He told me it was something else. And it was Hardin Memorial. Doesn't that make sense? Okay, he told me it was something else, and I never heard of that. No. That's where my husband had found a house, an apartment. They were sort of hard to come by. Ran around with other wives. Really don't remember doing much of anything except shopping and having coffee with one another. And I was just learning to cook back in those days. And I remember my husband said he loved chocolate pie. I made the most gorgeous chocolate pie one day. I'd never made a pie before. Took it out of the oven and had it in a Pyrex dish, dropped it in the floor and broke it all to pieces. Just sat down in the floor and cried, and he came in about that time. "Oh, that's all right, that's all right." But I was crushed. I'd spend all day making that pie. He was killed at Hurlesheim, and most of the ones that I knew best were either killed there or taken prisoner. There was one that I kept up with all the time, Harry Bassey. When I knew him, he was first lieutenant, and he ended up being company commander. I was thinking at first Ken was his company commander, but I may be wrong about that. I do know two others that Ken was company commander for. But Harry's wife and I were very good friends. And while they were overseas, we continued to correspond with one another. And for 50-some years, hers was always the first Christmas letter I got, and mine was always the first one she got. And I had pictures of her children, knew all about them, and she had pictures of mine, and we just knew each other's families. And they own orange groves in California. And soon after he came back from the war, from overseas, they sold that land to Disneyland. And at 35 or so, they were millionaires. And they moved up into the mountains in California and had a really good life. Had a good time, built a beautiful house, and took many trips and cruises and so forth, things I never could afford. But then later, he became ill with Alzheimer's, and she had to put him in a nursing home. And the nursing home cost so much that she had to give up their beautiful home, live in a trailer. And she had a reoccurrence of cancer, and they had one son who was not married, living down in the county where Disneyland is. Can't remember that county now, where they came from. So she moved back there, and took him to a nursing home there. And every year, every Christmas, the letters would get just a little bit sadder. And I thought, every year, oh, will I hear this year? And one year I did not. And I waited about a year, and I got a letter from her daughter-in-law, and she told me that she was just getting around to going through their things, because Levine Bassett died from her cancer soon around Christmas time the year before, and then he died the following October. And the daughter-in-law just was going through those things. She found my letter and wrote to tell me that they had died. And I kept up a correspondence with her now, because I was so glad to know something. No. He was in tanks, of course, and he was company commander, and he was soon off, got his captaincy, and then he was a major when he went overseas. And after he got overseas, he was in headquarters company. I can't tell me what it was that his dad did. Strategy, planning things, I think. I don't know what they call it. I doubt if the enlisted men were very fond of him, but he had a lot of good friends among the officers. But I find that most enlisted men don't think very highly of any of the officers anyway, because they're being told what to do, and I can see that. It's just good to me. I don't know how to tell you. I thought he was wonderful. Two other wives, and I drove out to the base and told them goodbye. Took them. They came in. They were in town. And we drove them out there and took them back. And Levine Bassey was one of those, and I think Charlie Ray was the other one, his wife. I won't swear to that. And once again, it takes me a while to absorb things. I was kind of in shock, they'd been talking about doing this so long, and And I just couldn't believe it was really going to happen. So we took them out 9:30 or 10 o'clock that night and told them goodbye. And then next morning I realized, oh, everybody's leaving this town today. And they did. All these women were packed and ready to go. And they just rolled out of there. And that's when I said I was just knew my landlady and my doctor. Couldn't wait for my mother to get there. I had every assurance that my husband would come back because he told me he would. And I believed everything he said. And he was first reported missing in action, and I would not accept that. And took a train trip up to somewhere in Michigan to the hospital to see Nick Novosel, who had been taken prisoner. And he couldn't tell me anything because it was such a mess at Herlsheim that day. And I corresponded with Sam Dwyer, who also was a prisoner. And he, too, said it was such bedlam. He had no idea what went on. So it was a long time before I really accepted it, although I'd been told that by that time, that he was dead. Months before I accepted it. When Ken went overseas, of course, I didn't have a permanent home. I'm going to have to quit again. And he had given his mother's address to be contacted. And you asked me what, he certainly was crazy about his mother, and she was him. He was her only son. And only one to carry on the name. Now my son is the only one to carry on the name. And Grandma Green was very fond of him, too. But Ken's sister called me and told me they had got the telegram and that he was missing. And that was when I started running to the Red Cross and trying to find out something. I just knew that this wasn't so. Red Cross insisted they couldn't do anything for me. Couldn't chase it down. So then I started writing to all these wives and husbands and seeing if they could tell me something. And I don't remember how I found out that Nick Novosel was in Michigan, in the hospital. But one of my husband's sisters and I took the baby and rode the train up there and back in the same day. And that baby, it was loaded with soldiers. And that baby was crawling up and down the aisles, and all these soldiers picking him up and holding him. And I'll never forget how Ken's brother-in-law laughed when we got home late that night. She said he said that baby was still going strong, but his wife and I looked like we'd really had it. And we had. What? Oh, what did I do? I hadn't gone to college, so I lived with my parents, and my mother took care of the baby, and I started college. And I was still just 20 years old, and went 2.5 years to Western. And by then, people were beginning to come home, and people that I knew were going to school there. And that's when my second husband came home. I already already knew. Oh yeah, so I'm back going to college, and then my present husband, whom I had gone to school, high school with, came home from service. He was involved. We went in on D-Day, and he had had a real rough time too. But he came home and was starting to college, and he was always a friend of the family. And my mother had corresponded with him all the time. He was over there, and he and I corresponded. And Mother invited him and somebody else for dinner. And we started going together again. And we got married in 1948. And he's the only father my first son ever knew. And he's been such a good father. And we kept up our relationship with Ken's family. And my mother-in-law said she always felt like I was her daughter and my second husband was her son-in-law. To this day, we still go to visit them. She's dead now, but my first husband has one sister left living, some cousins. Russell Goddard. He was in the infantry in he trained with the 69th, but he went in to Utah Beach, 4th Infantry Division. And I have a grandson. We have a grandson. Our children never paid much attention to Russell, talking about this war and so forth. But this grandson has been so interested in it. We had the movie, The Longest Day, and when he was real little, we let him watch that video, and he's just been fascinated with it. He's 14 now, but last year he was 13, and he had to write a paper, and he decided to write about World War II, and he kept interviewing Russell, as he said, and wrote a wonderful paper on it, and made an A on it, and we're so proud of that. But he's just always, every time he's around Russell, he asks questions about it. Of course, I knew nothing about birth. All this was new to me. And all I remember is how very happy I was that as soon as they brought him into the room after he was born and gave him to me, my mother and I took all his clothes off and examined him, and he was absolutely perfect, and I thought that was wonderful. And then Mother got somebody to help her send a telegram to his father, cablegram, I guess. I don't remember how long it was before he got that, but he did know that he had a son, and I got several letters from him about his son before he was killed. And I saved all these things, and I gave them to my son not too long ago. And I was telling him he ought to give them to the college. I'm not sure I'm ready to turn loose of these yet. Well, he actually wrote one letter to the son and told him how he had to protect his mother, and he was a man in the family and that sort of thing. And of course, he couldn't tell me anything much about what was going on. He did send me some things from over there. I got some candle lanterns that came from the Maginot Line, and he sent one paper where he had taken some German prisoners and said this was kind of gruesome, but he was sending it anyway. It's all he had to send. I don't remember, because after he was killed, of course, I got a lot that he had received, and they were just returned to me. So I don't know when he got my last letter. Because it was a long time after he was killed before I got that stuff back even. I still wasn't believing it. Only thing I ever remember his talking about so much was how cold he was. He was so cold. And I bought some airman's gloves, fur-lined, great big heavy thing, and still have them. Sent them to him, he forgot them. But I thought they'd be perfect in a tank. And but he never got those. They were one of the things that was sent back. Well, now, I wasn't in Abilene, because I had come back to Bowling Green with my parents. So I was living in Bowling Green, and I had relatives there. And we spent part of our time with my parents, and part of it in Illinois with his other grandmother and my husband's family. That baby, I guess. They do have a way of getting you up. But there again, I was young and I had a lot to do. And just didn't think about it. I always worried, and I was real excited when I got a letter. And I don't know whether I ever really accepted the fact that he was dead. Now, his mother, he was buried at, I guess he was buried at Hurlshine. And his mother made the remark that she would like to have him brought back. And it was her only son, and I was going to do anything she wanted. I don't think that would have been my choice, but I did sign the papers for that to be done. And it was after my present husband and I were married that happened. And that child and I went to Illinois for the burial at Springfield. And Ken was so fond of his mother, and she was of him. I just tried to do everything she wanted. Another thing she asked me was never to have my child's name changed. And my present husband wanted to adopt him, and I said, no, I can't do that, because I cannot change his name, which might have been very hard on the child, having two other siblings and everybody, because when he was real little, he wrote a story about he was staying with my present husband's mother while I went somewhere. And when I got back, she showed me this letter, and I wish I'd made her give it to me, that he had written, or a story. And he said everybody in his family was named Goddard but him, and his name was Green. And I should have suspicioned, that this makes you feel like an outsider. And we could have called him Green, even if I didn't change his name, I guess. I mean, could have called him Goddard. And that's one of my regrets. But anything else I did, I think I did what I could. I think they had lost all communication, and he got out of the tank to go to another tank to talk to somebody, and that was when he was shot. That's the best I could figure out. Like everybody else, I was very relieved it was over. And I guess I remember going to, I got most of my news from the movie. I'd go to the newsreels, built the movie a lot so I could catch the newsreel. And I do remember feeling so lost when I'd see the newsreels of all these soldiers coming home and their wives meeting. I remember feeling real low then. I had my moments of being low. But I still had that baby. I was still going to school, and then I worked part-time for a tax consultant. Worked at the courthouse a while. And still going to school and working part-time when Russell and I married. And he was in college. Well, I still haven't joined it. I contributed to a paper last year for college. I'm sorry? This is my first one. I'm very disappointed. I don't know anybody. I can't make any connection with anybody, but I'm not surprised. I didn't think I would, because everybody I knew was killed that day or taken prisoner and have since died. The only thing that, this doesn't have anything to do with the 12th really, but as I kept saying, is this all right? I kept saying that I never really accepted Ken's death, even though I went to that burial, because I didn't. I keep hearing people talk about closure, and I guess that was me. I never saw him. It was just a casket. But after Russell and I married, Russell had been through so much, and he had horrible nightmares sometimes, and I know he was dreaming about the war. And sometimes I would have these horrible dreams that Ken came home, and here I was married to somebody else. Now, how do I choose between? And just wake up, oh, how do I do this? That went on for 10 years, I guess, after we married. I tell him anything that I can think of about him, and he started writing a book about my life several years ago, and he took all of it from things that I had told him, but then he, like his mother, he quit, and he hadn't got back to it yet. They look a lot alike. And one thing that amazes me, all the Goddards and me really love tomatoes. Ken doesn't care for tomatoes at all, nor do any of the greens. And that surprises me. He doesn't know that. He didn't know they didn't like tomatoes. He just doesn't care for them. And I didn't know you acquired tastes like that. What kind of regrets? No, I really don't. I think I did the best I could. My first thought in marrying again was picking out the best one that was going to be a good father to keep, and I think I did it. To deal with your problems and not think it's somebody else's fault, because nobody else is responsible for you. I'm sorry that nobody seems to have any respect for the country anymore. The flag, the allegiance to the country. And I realize that some of our politicians are the cause of this. But I'm sorry those days are gone.